All right.
There we go. I think we're live. We are live. Okay,
Mhm.
fantastic. So, today we're going to be talking about the demonstrative function. So, I know for those who might be watching, the demonstrative function is the eighth function of Model A, of Alstra's Model A. It is typically thought to be the strongest unvalued function. It is sort of hidden in the background, as it were. But continuing our series where we go through the various functions of Model A, I just want to draw upon the insights of some of the top sociologists that I know to see what their reflections are on the demonstrative function, how they've experienced it, how it's manifested in their different interactions with people, with different examples of the different types.
Should we go around and say our types and what our demonstrative functions are? I think that could be helpful.
I think we can certainly do that.
Okay.
So I guess I could start with myself. So my demonstrative function as well, assuming I'm indeed an ILE and not an EIE,
I,
um,
I think you.
assuming I am an ILE or potentially an SLE, my my demonstrative function is extroverted logic, a very robust, very muscular extroverted logic. And the idea here, at least in theory, it should be that I find it quite effortless to get across factual information, how to apply that effectively, how to think about how to solve problems, and just understanding how information is relevant in terms of how it can be used, and then in terms of how to then apply that. To take that very sort of lightly, very sort of casually, to relax just by absorbing information, but not applying a sort of pressured expectation on other people that they need to be constantly revising and improving and working on their efficiency. I find for myself, I do not mind incompetent people very much as long as they are kind of lovable. And I think I think that this is sort of a hallmark whereas if it's more valued, I expect it to be more expected. You should be learning, you should be improving, you should be looking very seriously at what you've done and looking to make it better and more effective. And what evidence do you have to show that you've made it better and that sort of thing. Whereas, although I'm very alive to that side of thinking, I don't think that's something I need to necessarily expect of others or put pressure on others in order to do. I'd much rather have a chill time, as it were. All right, that's what I think for my demonstrative function. Who wants to go next?
I guess I'll go. Since I wasn't here for the last chat, I'll make up for it. So I'm Kimani. I'm an IOI. That would make my demonstrative function TI. Now that has more to do with structural logic, like basically just like the formalities of of like language or organization or what have you. So we'll get more focus on the technical details and definitions of things, but ILIs don't particularly care about the formalities for their own sake. We can kind of use it for the sake of precision, but at the end of the day, we want to use it to try to get our facts straight as much as possible. So like we're very good at structuring and organizing information, but we want to be able to apply it in the TE way. And we do care more about the efficiency and competence part of it.
Sense. Thank you, Kimani. How about you, Rita?
I'm Rita. I'm an EII. I know people will say I'm not, but that's fine. And for the purpose of this video, my demonstrative function is introverted intuition, which is, I guess, like universally considered the weirdest, hardest, most difficult like element to try to describe, right? I mean, but we can try. But I have some thoughts about this, about like what it means. So I think okay, so we're all doing this. So a brief description. So I think for introverted intuition, people sometimes say it's associated with like prediction. That's kind of right. Because you will hear like introverted intuition lead types like ILIs or mostly ILIs actually, say stuff like, I think this will happen, or if this happens, this will happen, right? Um, for introverted intuition demonstrative, I think there is an element of that. But I think it's more about general insight. And I think what I mean by insight is that introverted intuition kind of like my sense of it is that it like fills the gaps between events. So it sort of gives you, in many cases, like a post hoc, like explanation for how events fit together in a kind of like narrative of causality. And it doesn't mean that it's correct, right? Like lots of post hoc things are not correct. They're just, like what people think based on what they've observed. And there could be alternative explanations had it gone another way. But I think that introverted intuition strong types, like people who have introverted intuition and demonstrative, do tend to do this sort of like bridging of events in a causal way. Like they tend to like to give like a sort of meaning to things that happen sequentially. That's what I'll say about it for now.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Peter. I am an LIE, a logical intuitive extrovert or energizer, that to make my demonstrative function extroverted intuition. I find it easier to describe my demonstrative function, extroverted intuition, by seeing that as what I fall back when I'm not concentrating on my sixth function, which is extroverted sensing, which is my valued function, but one which I keep thinking I'm not that good at, because extroverted sensing and extroverted intuition, they sort of occupy the same space. The more you focus on one, the less you focus on the other. You can focus 50% on one, 50% on the other, but the more you focus on one, the less you focus on the other. And so, for instance, if extroverted sensing, a trait of it would be, for instance, you have a task to do. People who have very focused extroverted sensing, they'll just use a flow of high concentration, high hard work, high focus to just do it, right? Extrovert, which may be also a way that sort of just doing something in a figurative way with brute force, right? Not through imagination, not to creativity, not to finding better ways of doing it. You just do it by concentration, discipline, effort, etc. And extroverted intuition is sort of the opposite of that, is that when instead of focusing on doing something by discipline, brute force, or in other circumstances by confrontation or imposing yourself, you automatically keep thinking of better ways of doing it, or less direct ways of doing that, and more innovative ways of doing it, right? This is also a strength. However, the weakness part of it, which is the one that I feel guilty about it when I focus too much on my demonstrative function rather than the mobilizing function, because you by default you focus on the demonstrative, right? It's a sort of it's sort of the lazy function, I'll call it. So, for instance, if instead of focusing on the work to be done in a sort of laser beam way, my mind starts to divert not only in better ways of doing it, but also a variety of random or not, maybe not random, but variations from what I actually should be focusing at hand. Of course, in isolation, extroverted intuition also includes sort of more of alternative ways to the present reality, which focus on an inclination to go for creative things, new things, alternative ways of doing things, alternative ways of thinking. Thinking the potential, okay, we're doing something like this, but maybe it'll be better if we're doing something a bit different. This extroverted intuition, which of course is also a strength, but as a demonstrative function, it often manifests itself, as I just mentioned, that it is also a sort of, okay, where I tend to drift into or to drift towards, rather than purely focus on the mobilizing function, right? So it is basically, okay, I often feel it as a sort of drag, in the sense, okay, I should be focusing on extroverted sensing, but extroverted intuition is a sort of what is diluting that, right? Obviously, when I don't feel that I have to focus on my extroverted sensing, because I feel relaxed about it, or I've already done a lot of it, then I can sort of more calmly relax and just drift into my extroverted intuition and let my mind go into all of this more or less focused things. That's the best way I can describe it, really. Does it make sense to you, Jack?
I definitely, and also I like how you brought in the transition between the mobilizing and the demonstrative there. I think that's a key thing. A way I've always tried to look at all the functions really is how they match up with their opposite, their exact opposite, where that sort of mutual exclusivity means you can, or if you're leaning towards one, you're necessarily moving away from the other. And I think that does show most apparently for the demonstrative in conjunction with the mobilizing.
Yeah, because I say this because, to be honest, right, I have to say that if I don't see it that way, if I don't phrase it that way, I have a bit. I find it less clear to explain the demonstrative function. Actually, to be honest, I mean, these days I find it best to always explain the functions in this way. Like, for instance, the role function is essentially what is preventing you from being a sort of leading function machine, right?
Yes.
So that's one way of looking into it.
Yep.
Yeah, I want to discuss how the demonstrative function plays with some of the other functions. So like mobilizing is one. I really like this point. I have my own examples of this, but then also I really like thinking about how it plays with the creative function.
Yes.
But for maybe we should just finish going around first.
I want to hear from Daniel, and then let's go into that. Absolutely. Go on, Daniel.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be brief about this. So yeah, I'm an ESI, so my demonstrative function would be introverted sensation. I think that can manifest in a few different ways. One can be kind of an attentiveness to my homeostasis or my physical needs. Maybe being even particular about my physical needs and my physical wants, and how I want certain things to be, kind of having a control of the sensory, right? It could manifest kind of also in a focus in the here and now, right? In a focus of what's going on around you in the immediate moment, what's in front of you, right? Which I would say I tend to have a decent awareness of. Another thing I'll say is that, and something that hasn't been mentioned, is that the demonstrative function is what kind of distinguishes you from the rest of your quadra, right? Because you have it as a four-dimensional element, the rest of your quadra does not, right? And it's the one that, in principle, right, the element that you most focus on that's not a part of your quadra values. So with that being said, I will say that obviously, not valuing introverted sensation, that can be seen, for example, in my judgments. Ultimately, my judgments will be of a harsh nature. They won't be of a soft nature. And that's one way you can see, okay, it's not a valued element, right? Even if it's in the background, or even if it's something that, if I need to engage with, I can, but it's not the priority. So uh, those are a few different things I'll say.
Do you mind, Jack, if I take this point? Because
Yeah, no,
okay,
I don't mind. I don't mind. Please do. Please do.
okay. I really like this point. So one way that I think about the demonstrative function, because it is strong but unvalued, and so I try to think about like what that means. And so like what I see, for example, in me is that I will often, so I have introverted intuition as my demonstrative. So I will often appear to like do things where I know the outcome will be bad, but I'll like still do it anyway or something. And the people will just be like, well, why would you do that? And I'll say something like, because I had to experience it, or because like it wasn't guaranteed to be like that. Like I had to know for sure, right? And so that's like an example of like where it's not like I'm not making decisions based on introverted intuition, even though like I am strong. Another thing that for me, when I compare, for example, so my leading function is our relations, so introverted feeling. So when I think about people that have introverted feeling as a demonstrative, so we're talking SEIs or IEIs, um, they are people that I would characterize as being sort of like effortlessly interpersonal. So they have like a quality where like you feel like you've always known them when you talk to them, right? Because they can sort of create a feeling of intimacy really quickly with people. But I think the key point there is that they're essentially doing it with like most people, right? And so that's very different from like an EII or especially an ESI, where introverted um, ethics is being used. They can create intimacy, but it's only with the people that they choose, right? And so it's being used very discriminately there.
Mhm.
And like other like two examples that I really like for where introverted feeling as a demonstrative is strong but clearly not being used for decision making is you see these examples of IEI women who are dating like SLE or EIE men who are kind of like, let's say, assholes, right? And so there's numerous examples, right? So this isn't a political thing. So like, please, people who are watching, don't get mad at me. But like Melania with Trump, and then like Huma Abedin with like Anthony Weiner or whatever his name is. Okay, so in these examples, like the IEI woman, like they say this if you go back in interviews, they'll say something like, when I first met him, I thought he was an asshole, or he invited me on a date and I said, no, you're a douchebag, or I crawled through the bathroom window on our first date because I thought he was so awful, right? But then they like end up marrying the douchebag. So it's like they obviously can discern that like the person is prone to like being unfaithful or like these qualities that like an introverted feeling strong type would pick up on, but then they don't make the decision like to stay away from them based on that. Instead, they end up, being in a relationship with them. So that's introverted feeling strong, but not being used to make a decision, which is what I see with IEIs and to some extent SEIs, but they don't tend to go for assholes.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah. Save me from my incorrectness here.
No, my comment, and I think this is a very good illustration, right? Because the reason why this happens is the following, and this is also why AIs often tend to think of themselves as, I mean, especially when you go for MBTI, right? How that's very common that AIs, they often identify themselves as INTP. They tend to see themselves as logical types because I think that the way they see it is the following: is that yes, they have this inclination. It is easier for them, right, to spot whether I like or not this person, or I think this person is good or bad, etc. They very naturally can understand these dynamics between of people because they can make this judgment of people within R, which comes naturally. However, there for them, where they feel that their duty, their inclination, what they should do is to make decisions based on impersonal criteria using L, introverted logic, which is demobilizing, right? So, for instance, let's take at face value. I mean, obviously, we don't know. I don't know what, for instance, what's her name? Huma Abedin saw, if she ever saw anything in Anthony Winner, right? Although this guy is already old history, but anyway, I don't know. But let's say that let's, for the sake of argument, let's stick with the scenario. So her first impression was, okay, this guy is horrible. A guy who later called himself Carlos Danger, and she was the one who climbed out of the window of the bathroom, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
But later, right? Later, she had this impression, right? But later, somebody, presumably Hillary Clinton, make the argument to why no, you had to consider because this guy has XYZ qualities, or this guy actually politically is very clever, or this guy could be very good for this, or this guy is that. In the case of somebody like Trump, it is more obvious, right? Okay, no, he makes a bad impression, but he's incredibly wealthy, and he has shown how to raise well-adjusted children, etc. So take a second look at him. Use your head rather than your subjective judgment. And I think that just like you feel yourself better about yourself when you're focusing more on your mobilizing function rather than your demonstrative function, I suspect this may be how it works for these AI women, right? I mean, men as well, but to give the examples, is that no, but their first inclination is the stereotypical ick thing, right? Because that's what their instinctive attitude tells them about these guys. But when they put some sort of logic to it, or at least supposed logic to it, then they say no. Actually, this guy this guy is actually a better choice, right? Whether that decision was good or was the right one or not, that's another story. Because I'm not saying they get it right. Of course, they have to judge whether they get it right or not. But you know what I mean, right? So they want to overrule their first inclination to judge people based on their 8R function. They want to overrule that to use the L function, right? The mobilizing L function, right? Of course, that doesn't happen with EIIs or ESIs, right? EIIs are going to always go for their R1 function, and they don't feel the need to pay much attention to L. I mean, a little bit, yes, but they don't.
Despite having arguably stronger L in the role position.
Stronger than?
Stronger than an IEI's mobilizing.
I mean, look, this is another subject, right? Maybe we shouldn't go maybe Rita, you and I, maybe we shouldn't go too much for extroverted intuition now. That's another subject which I think it's interesting, because I am not sure. To be honest with you, I don't sure if I agree with that, right? I'm not sure if your role function is necessarily stronger or you're better than it than your mobilizing function, right? I think we tend to feel more confident about our role function,
Yeah, that's true.
precisely because we don't think that is very important. It's a social confession that you make, right? Okay, I suppose I have to do it, right? So I'll do it. While the mobilizing is something that you feel you should do for yourself, but because you care about it, you're never completely confident on it. And if you are confident on it, everybody can clearly see that you're being ridiculous. So I just dispute that what you said now, that the role function necessarily stronger than the mobilizing. I'm not sure about that.
I would like to go back to what Rita was starting to touch on earlier in the discussion when she was talking about the relation of like the demonstrative to the creative function. I think the type harnesses their demonstrative function to service their creative function. That's the main reason why how a type actually values the demonstrative is not for its own sake, is to facilitate what they want to do with their creative function for the most part.
And I think that's exactly right, Kimani. But in a way, the demonstrative function is the helper's helper. That the well, we were talking before about this this what's the word this transition between the demonstrative and the mobilizing, the shift from what I say is low stakes, low reward towards high stakes, high reward. That forms a growth transition. But there's also, alongside the transition, there's the dynamic, the relationship between the function and its inverse, not its opposite, which is the transition, but its inverse. Say the extroverted logic to introverted logic, etc., etc. So the inverse of a demonstrative function is always going to be that creative function. And there you have this interesting tension. I'd even call it a fluid interplay, because both these functions, what do they share? They share that flexibility. They're all they're both not held very, very tightly and strongly in what decisions are made with them. Go on, Kimani, you saying something?
No, yeah, no, I was saying like so like what you were talking about before, like so you call them the flexible functions as opposed to the stubborn functions, like your
Yes.
base mobilizing, you're basing your mobilizing and in those functions that are on that axis. You reach your conclusions and your decisions through those functions, and the flexible functions, or I call them the compliant functions, they just adjust to help facilitate and carry out those decisions and those judgments.
Yes, exactly. And then you got, because these are both flexible. These are both also, not only are they flexible, they're also, in terms of accepting, producing, or I call supplying, demanding, they are supplying as well as flexible. So they really are there to help the other function in their respective blocks. So in that particular environment, you have essentially two helpers. One helper is valued but has less energy allocation to it. That's the creative function. But the other one is not valued for its own sake, but it has a lot more energy running through it. It's almost like you are harnessing a dragon and you are bending that to the things you actually value, and it has an endless supply of it. It's like Naruto with the multi-tailed fox, you could say,
Right.
where
So
you draw from it.
yeah, well, my explanation for that is so like if you look at the dimensionalities in Model A, you'll see that the demonstrative is tied with your first function, the base or leading function for being four-dimensional, right?
Yeah.
So understanding that I come to for that is that functions that share the same dimensionality are like overlap with one another, like in a literal sense, they're co-dimensional. Like I like to use the extroverted ST functions as an example because it's very visible. So I call it like the implementation area. So you have the sensory TE and the external SE. So you can't do one without also doing the other. So in the case of like TE, you're doing like actual physical methodologies. You're actually using like resources or methodologies that you have to like modify the workflow of your environment. You're changing how things function, how the workflow goes. But you also can't do that without exerting some force to control or shape material conditions. Like doing one necessarily entails also doing another. And the difference between, say, an SLE and an LSE is which end of that interplay are they actually focusing on and engaged with, what they actually value. So the LSE is going to focus more on, hey, is this environment functioning well? The thing's efficient. Whereas the SLE is going to be focusing more on controlling and shaping the environment in a particular way without worrying about efficiency or practicality.
Yeah. But, yeah, I actually I want something that's been said. Now I agree totally that and actually I think that when people describe the demonstrative or the creative function in themselves, there is an inclination, I think, certainly I see it in me, of mixing it up with the creative, because obviously, I mean, extroverted thinking, introverted thinking, extroverted intuition, you can use them together, right? They don't compete with each other. You can use them together, and if you have them as a creative and one as a demonstrative, I think it's almost inevitable that you do use them together when you have them in those positions, right? So I think that creates a situation where it's difficult when you are thinking about it to differentiate when you're using one and the other. So, for instance, when Rita comments on her definition of extroverted intuition, I notice some introverted intuition, quote unquote, contamination, right? And I suspect the same thing happens to me and the other way around. So I'm mentioning that as sort of my empirical evidence for this, that you when you have the creative and the demonstrative, right? Okay, the creative is the one that you value. The demonstrative is somewhat stronger, but you end up using them more or less together. So that's my that's my
Yeah, Jack, I really like your description of the fluid interplay between creative and demonstrative, because I think that it creates like the most interesting socionic scenarios, because essentially, like, even though your first function, your leading function is your strongest function, when you have an element in the element pairing that you have in 2 and 8 gives like a very rich kind of like understanding to both of the elements, in a way that I don't think you have when you have like 1 versus 7, because one is leading and the other is ignoring. So 2 and 8, I think, form like almost like a continuous, like what Peter said, like contaminated cycle, in which I think the person is very clear in their mind about what they're doing, but to external observers, it can look like, which one is it, So like I, for example, with any creative and introverted intuition demonstrative, depending on how you meet me and in what context or whatever and what your type is, you tend to either see me as like rigidly focused on one thing, like single-minded, to like an obsessive quality, or you see me as like impulsively flitting between like, like interest du jour, where like I almost seem like ADHD, right? And I don't see them as mutually exclusive at all. Like I could explain to you exactly why, but people do tend to have this reaction to me where they say, oh, there you go again. You're being like obsessive about one thing, or like, what are you doing? You're all over the place, or this is so like impulsive. Weren't you thinking this thing before? And I'm like, well, no, I'm always thinking all the things at once. And then like there's like this slow sort of like accumulation of evidence in the background that then selects like the most prominent thing at any particular time, right? Or like in his example, for extroverted feeling and introverted feeling, they sort of have like if you take a person who has extroverted feeling in the demonstrative and introverted feeling in the creative, they're very social. They seem to tend to know how to discriminate between like who are their good friends and who aren't. But then they sometimes hang out with the people that aren't really their good friends. And so it can be very confusing to people who expect only introverted feeling or only extroverted feeling, you know? And I have more to say on this, but I'll just put like a hold on
Yeah,
that
I
for
wanted
now.
to add briefly because you were giving examples of the interplay. I guess one example for LSI and ESI that comes to mind, it's almost like a panther, in the sense that they can be maybe calm. They can have like a calming presence, right? Or be kind of chill. But when they need to pounce, when they need to attack, they can turn it on, right? And maybe that's kind of the interplay of, the introverted sensation with the extroverted sensation, right? How the introverted sensation feeds the extroverted sensation. Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about. I was going to move on to the ILE, SLE, but I'm not sure if anyone had
Well,
anything else to say.
Jack, you have more comments?
just one quick thing. There's the fact that Kimani and we are extinguishers. That means that
Yes,
we
I want to talk about
share the same fluid interplay, just in reverse. And
Yes.
so it'll be interesting. It's an interesting opportunity to see, for instance, how how the both logics working in that fluid interplay vary between someone who values one side and not the other, and the vice versa.
Yeah, I think this is also really interesting to me. I think it can be very hard to tell them apart. And you can only it's really you really tell them apart from other things that the person is doing, but someone who has, you know, like for example, introverted thinking is the second, and extroverted thinking is the eighth, and someone who has the exact flip like you've described, they're both very it is very hard to the way that they use it. There are, I think, nuances in differences, but it is hard. I'll say one more thing. I think I want to consider intertype relationships at some point, but in this particular example, I think that it's one of the most fun things, it leads to one of the most fun relationships. So like for instance, I really enjoy talking to Peter, and when our like extroverted intuition and introverted intuition are like the conversation, because it's sort of like we're both very good at the back and forth between those functions. I think
Yeah.
for extinguishment, like with an EIE, it's the same thing, right? And I think for illusionary, I think it really forms the like fun backbone of the relationship, because they don't have that interplay. They don't have the flipped interplay, but they have the expectation that your dual has of this functional pairing of the 2 and the 8. And so it sort of like allows you to just do the 2 and 8 functions without any kind of like restriction or something, you know?
And I think that's another thing which I think I've noticed. I've listened to all sorts of different sort of thinkers online, the way they frame their thoughts. Often when I'm speaking to someone who's extroverted logic only, or that's the thing which that they are stubborn in. I think great. There's lots of factual information here, lots to learn from, but there's less perhaps of the ordering of that information into structures. Meanwhile, if I'm dealing with someone who is all about the introverted logic, okay, very very clear structure, but what about all this information here, and what have you tuned out and why? Whereas if I'm listening to someone like, say, Rudyard Lynch, for instance, on YouTube, who I think is very much an ILI, his ability to get across a large amount of factual information and also to present that large amount of factual information in a very clear narrative at the same time, I actually find very, 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 very satisfying. He's covering both bases, where in a way which I am also covering both bases and thinking, okay,
Yeah.
that thing's missing from this account.
So like the way I've always thought of it, like so like if you think about like L like TI general principles, like in my mind they naturally just are kind of sorted as, oh well, those are very general facts, right? They're just a very reliable fact. And then when you deal with TE, it's just like, all right, you're doing like particular variables. But like in my mind, it's all just facts. And then the TI is just like, all right, well, how do you like assort it? All right, these are very general. So like so we kind of call it a law, but that doesn't necessarily like apply universally to it. So, but you were talking about like how like ILE versus ILI. So I think that the commonality between those two types is that they both focus on just like raw concepts and connotations, right? And what we do with our demonstrative and our creative functions, we actually just use those to articulate the concepts that we're reflecting on or playing around with in our minds. So because like ever since I was a kid, I always noticed that a lot of times I would like have a solution to a problem before I could kind of articulate it. I would have to articulate it post hoc, but beforehand, I always have like an intuitive sense of what the answer is already. It's just a matter of putting it into words. So, and I imagine it's probably similar for ILEs. So, but the only difference is ILIs are more focused on like, all right, what's likely to happen? How is this likely to play out? We're trying to predict things, whereas ILEs are coming up with like different ways of interpreting things in the abstract.
Yep. Yep. And I think the also the key areas of contention typically between extinguishers is when you get to the stubborn functions. That's when you find themselves that's when they find themselves not budging. And then the relationship is more like to break down. But in sort of fluidity, there's no area of, okay, I'm not budging. So it becomes a very free, open, exploratory space. I guess the difficulty when it comes to, say, a closer relationship is that if you're both constantly not budging, sorry, if you're both constantly budging, both constantly keeping that fluidity, eventually someone has to make the final decision, and there's no one making decision for the other person to yield to, which is where it gets a bit more difficult. But at least in an intellectual conversation, I think it does. It's where at least between an ILI and an ILE, the logical intercourse can become very, very rich.
Right. I would say a good point of agreement that you can have between like ILEs and ILIs that are having like an intellectual discussion. Like the way I see it is like the TI is good if you get good predictive value from it, right? If it's really a law, all right, then we should be able to see that this we can make a prediction and say, all right, then this is going to have this factual like outcome from it, and all right, and we should be able to like test it out. So I guess it's kind of like it kind of reminds me of like I remember listening to some interviews with the physicist David Deutsch. I think I know he's an alpha NT. I suspect he's an LII because he talks a lot about like, well, in science, people are too fixated on like, oh, the theory has to have predictive value, but it also has to have like a meaning, has to provide an explanation and that. And they're just like, well, I mean, and I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I'm just like, okay, you can have a really pretty theory that gives you a nice, like, cohesive, meaningful narrative to it. But at the end of the day, you know it's true is if you're able to make a prediction from it. Like, so, like, I could tell his alpha values of where he wasn't so much concerned about the predictive value or the practical value. He just wants to get down to the transcendent truth of things.
Sorry, not to divert this discussion very much, but on this point, yeah, I think it's because people who are very focused on L, if they've on introverted in thinking, if they arrive at a sort of theory that makes perfect sense, it's completely coherent, they just assume in a way that, well, it has to reflect reality, right? It has to be true because you don't have to prove it. It is self-evident that it is true. That's my impression, at least.
Yep. The idea is too beautiful to not be true.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
But do you guys find, like, am I the only person who, like, do you find that it is difficult sometimes to tell whether it's like the element is in the second position and the inverse one is in the eighth, or whether it's the flip? Like for me, it's sometimes difficult. Yeah.
Phenomenologically, I think it's easier to look at the stubborn functions because this is where the lines are drawn in the sand and the person is not budging. I think when it comes to when it comes to the more flexible functions, it's easy to determine strength. You think, right, this person is really versatile across both. And then you think they're really versatile and they're not suppressing either aspect of it. They're doing both a lot. You can think, right, this is flexibility. They're going between both. Which one is ultimately valued? That's harder. I think if you were to, I think it's easier for the person who has it, who is that type, to experience it. Because as you said before, Rita, the demonstrated function is lightning quick. That initial reaction comes. And then you stop and think, okay, that's my initial reaction. But let's think about that for a second. And is actually important to me. And that's when things shift more towards creative function territory, where it shifts more towards, then the leading and also the mobilizing ultimately being the drivers. And so I can think of it as my wife. I love talking about my wife as per usual. And she gets that ick feeling as well from people. But she doesn't like to go so far as to just verbalize or to draw too much attention towards that ick. And as soon as it's about the environment and the vibe, she will go with the vibe. She will not hold on to the ick. Even though the ick,
I would never do that.
first.
I would never do that. Yeah. I would never go with the vibe. It's like my feeling, and that's it. Like,
Rita, if I understood what your point now was about how the creative and the demonstrative, sometimes you don't really know which one. That's one of the points I'm making earlier. I would say, and that's the following: if you look at intertype relationships, the demonstrative is something that you don't care that somebody else doesn't like very much, right? Obviously, because the dual has your demonstrative as the least valued function, right? So
I'm gonna put a little pin in this, but you continue, because I have controversial thoughts on this. Yeah.
No, okay, no, but I mean, to make it very simplistic, right? For instance, if I am using my 8 function, when talking to an LSI or an ESI, that's when either they say, okay, but that's pointless or that's useless, or what's I'm talking about, right? I don't know even know what I'm talking about. And essentially, okay, so I'll focus on something else, right? While if you are focusing on your creative function, this is something that they will appreciate, because that's where there's their mobilizing function, right? So that is where you split. If you have for instance, and the same thing goes for the other way around. For instance, if an LSI or an ESI is focusing, in my opinion, too much with S, that annoys me, because it's something that I don't give importance to. If they are focused on F, right? Especially if they are not using F against me but with me, this is something, of course, they appreciate. But from their point of view, right, they're also going to have the same difficulty in splitting one from the other in their minds. Although in their actions, I think we can spot when they are focusing on F and when they're focusing on S. And by the way, Jack, this is why, for instance, one of the reasons why when you gave us that version of your typing questionnaire, right, your app, which is why when my ESI partner did it, she kept getting SCI as a result. Now, only when I say, okay, I'll do it with you, and I'll just say if you agree or not. And then, of course, you went into ESI. But you see what I mean, right? For somebody who doesn't know socionics, right, doesn't spot, this question is about S, this is about F, then it can be very, it's difficult.
This is ultimately why I stopped trying to do the questionnaire. I thought you cannot design a maze for whom there are different points of entry for different people, yet
Mm.
always have it designed to present to them ones that the same entrance. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so basically, I think we are in agreement in that generally on that generally.
That's something I've noticed too. Like even when I'm doing like type interviews, sometimes I would ask similar opening questions, but depending on who you're talking to, they're gonna have a different understanding or interpretation of what you're even asking in the first place. So
Yeah.
and I can imagine if you just have that as like a static questionnaire, like you're gonna get a mixed quality of results back. Like so yeah, I think for the foreseeable future, interviews are gonna have to be like the gold standard of typing. Interviews and I guess like biographical analysis. But yeah.
That's my inclination as well. Rita, you're going to say that you're going to.
I want controversy.
Yeah, you want to.
Oh,
You would disagree to what you just said, or have I got you right?
yeah. There was something else I wanted to talk about too. There's like a couple things. Sorry, before the controversial point. Quickly, even though there's this fluid interplay between 2 and 8, and I think it's hard when you're externally observing someone to pinpoint, is it this in their second function or is it in their 8th function? I think that the person feels it very strongly which function it's in. So what I mean by this is it's hard for me sometimes to say, like, does this person have introverted intuition in the second function or the 8th function? However, when I interact with types like LIEs or EIEs who have extroverted intuition and introverted intuition in the exact like flip to me, I'm always like, holy shit, that person is good at extroverted intuition. Because as you said, it's like lightning quick. And it's like they're just sort of like effort, like they're just throwing it out there. Like they don't even like realize how like good they are at this thing. And it makes me really jealous. Like sometimes Peter will say something and I'll be like, I didn't think of that. Like I'm so pissed that I didn't. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel very strongly that the LIE or the EIE is stronger than me at extroverted intuition, and it makes me quite jealous.
I felt that way when I read Spinoza.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, right? It's like, okay. Okay, now to say the controversial thing. I think okay. I think so. Two things that I think are controversial. One is the idea that it's not valued. I think in a way you do value your demonstrative, not in like the stereotypical way. And like technically it's not valued, right? It's not valued like
From a
it's
quadra value perspective.
yeah, exactly.
No, it's not valued in the sense that, as I just said, right? If you kept focusing on it, on interaction with your duo, right? You're just going to drive the duo crazy, right? That's my point.
Okay, well, that's sort of my point too. I think personally that where duality can often go wrong is exactly with the demonstrative function because it is your dual's polar. And I think that in typical interactions, like when your dual is like with you, it is pretty effortless and you're not sort of like hitting your dual with your demonstrative function, which is their polar, right? But I think there are some cases, like particularly like when you explicitly try to talk about things, like in my, maybe this is a function of like, because my duality is like extroverted thinking and introverted feeling. But like when I try to talk to like LSEs about what I value or whatever, and they sort of make an indication that they don't value introverted intuition, I get really annoyed. Like it does annoy me. Now in their day-to-day life it doesn't tend to bother me. Like I don't see examples of it, but when sometimes, like for example, Peter, I've described this to you on occasion where like I've gotten into like an argument with an LSE because I've said something like, well, couldn't you see that like I did this because I thought that X would happen or whatever? And you've, Peter, said, yeah, that's so obvious that X would happen. And I could see why you'd be frustrated that they wouldn't like appreciate that. Like, not that I would have them, not that I would expect them to realize that, but that I would expect them to like sort of heed my advice or something or believe my motives for something, right? And Peter can see it very clearly why I would be saying something like that, but my dual can't. And so I think it can create conflict. Also, I think that even though you obviously don't value your polar, like it's, you know, it's like your most it's the most devalued element, you do value it typically in the way your dual presents it. So for example, my polar is extroverted sensing. I am attracted to men who are more like with it and put together, who do not seem like submissive, who seem like they would be able to like handle like day-to-day things that I wouldn't be able to handle. And like, yeah, I am not attracted to strong intuitor types because I feel like it would just be like draining for me. Does that make sense? So I am attracted to a degree of extroverted sensing, but used in like a very specific way. Similarly, I think ILIs are definitely attracted to extroverted feeling of their dual. I see all the time, and this is why commonly the relationship is ILI and EIE. ILI men frequently go for women who are like very charismatic, blah, 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 because it's the kind of like extroverted sensing, extroverted feeling draw that like their dual has, even though they don't value extroverted feeling. Okay.
Well,
That's the
okay.
draw of supervision, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but in that particular example, right? Okay, look, I mean, I mean, that particular example, right? I mean, is because, of course, the dual of the ILI is the SE, and the SE also has this sort of power and charisma. I mean, I mean, so I mean, okay, I don't want to make everything about relationships, right? But I think that SE and EIE, especially, is one of this. It's one of the things that the MSCE can seem like an EIE, right, and vice versa. And then, so, I mean, it's a sort of illusion without being a relationship of illusion. You know what I mean, right? That's what I'm trying to get.
There's a you can kind of tell the difference because like SEEs, like they can be like really like passionate and like have a lot of energy, but at the same time, they tend to be more grounded and in my opinion tend to have a bit more in the way of common sense.
Yeah. Sure, but that may not be obvious that immediately, right? That's my point.
So like what ILIs are generally looking for is people like the initiative taking, right? It's just like the just the raw physical motivation and gumption to just go and get things done and do things. It isn't so much necessarily the emotionality like an ESE or whatever. They're more about like, you know, creating a vibe and an atmosphere. Like ILIs don't really care about that. It's more about like taking that physical energy and putting it towards like something productive or worthwhile. Like, so it's not just so much about the vibes or emotionality. It's just like, what is that energy being harnessed towards?
Yeah. Okay. I have to say that I actually agreeing now with Rita's point. When I had any kind of relationship going on with some kind of strong intuitives, sometimes I felt precisely this, right? The fact that, okay, even if I don't want you, I don't need you to take care of me, but I don't want to be the one to take care of your sort of very
Yes.
daily things either, right? So I understand that.
Yeah, that's it, actually. That's the right way to articulate it. Because I do not ever want to be the dominant person in the relationship. And I feel like a relationship with an intuitor forces me to be that. And then it forces me to do my polar, which is terrible for me. Yeah. Anyway, Jack, what are your thoughts on this?
So just one thing, actually, just going back to what you talked about before, Rita, about where the demonstrative function between duals can be a point of, I wouldn't necessarily call it tension, but more like, oh my goodness, why can't you do this thing? I think of an example. Let's say I'm on Facebook and I find that Facebook account, that page called Terrible Maps. Right,
Oh yeah,
terrible maps. Oh, computer note. Okay, yeah, it's the
I
first
love
don't
it.
know.
I look at the X account.
Yeah, oh, you see your next. Okay, fair enough. There are two accounts. I'm pretty sure they're connected. Amazing Maps and Terrible Maps.
Yeah, yeah,
Amazing Maps shows legitimately useful or interesting maps for you to know about, right? Terrible Maps flips it. It deliberately presents useless stuff in map form. And it's often
yeah,
it's deliberately stupid. And so it's funny,
yes,
right?
yes,
If I show that to my wife, she's not going to find that funny because she doesn't have the background knowledge to see why that's funny. And
yes,
so for me, it's not, the point is I'm not really expecting in terms of the extroverted logic. It's more that an extroverted ethics moment has been missed because of a gap in the extroverted logic.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
Rita, to give an example, right? There a guy put a map where every state in the US was defined by its relationship to Ohio. Like, for instance, you have Ohio, then you have North Ohio, North Ohio, South Ohio, Southeast
Really
Ohio.
good.
So every state of Ohio except Florida. You know why?
I have no idea.
Because he hated Florida. Florida does not deserve to be referred to as Ohio. So that was the map. So this kind of stupidity. But you can, I find it hilarious, right? So maybe, but some people find it stupid. They realize that.
Yeah, so I don't know if we've talked about this. So like, okay, so on that point, like Peter's brought this up a lot, like previously about how the demonstrative is like the fun or like humor function or like feel good function or like pastime function. I don't think we've talked about that.
Pastime, relaxing function.
Yes.
Actually,
Yeah.
and actually, right when I I haven't done it in a while, but when I have interviewed people, one of my questions is, okay, can you tell me can you imagine what would you do if you could, either if you already were retired or if you didn't have to work, or if you suddenly realize you need to work, can you what do you focus on, right? As what you do. In many cases, they have no idea, which to me suggests essentially that low T, right? Low, because they just never thought about it, so they cannot answer. But in many, I think it is useful if people do think about it, have an answer. I think it's useful because what they say is an indication of the demonstrative, right? So that's my theory, at least.
I feel like, yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Are you sure? No, you go.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like I get this. So my humor is pretty it is, I think it could be, it should be, it's usually like pure introverted intuition. I've noticed this with LII. So I feel like I and ILIs have like a very similar sense of humor where it goes to like a kind of extreme and dark place. Like my sense of humor is very like um it's like random, but with like a bit of like if something were taken to an extreme, like when I make jokes. And I think for fun, yeah. So, and this goes back to the mobilizing point that Peter made earlier. I tend to like just like be a zombie. So like I like on a weekend, if I don't have anything to do, I will just like stare at a TV in like this weird zombie state where like I'm not, I don't even know if I'm like watching TV, and like hours, like days can go by and I'm like not barely aware of it, right? But then I always get really mad at myself because I just think like, oh, I haven't even left my couch today. Like I'm atrophying. Like I should go outside and walk around, or I should go exercise, or like my health is now going to suffer, blah, blah, blah. So I do tend to have this sort of like weird introverted intuition zombie tendency that I always feel like I need to fight for like in order to like stay healthy and you know.
That's something which what I found LIIs, for instance, just my day-to-day life, when I've told them when you're not confident in your environment, you withdraw into yourself. You just go into your mental palace. And like, how did you know that? And like
Yeah,
it's
for
that it's a
sure.
sense of okay, when you are not confident in your space, when you're mobile, when you're not confident enough to inhabit your mobilizing function, you will withdraw to low stakes, low reward. You will withdraw for an LII or an EII to introvert intuition. You will detach from your immediate environment because the immediate environment does not feel like it's sufficiently either safe or harmonious or in flow, whatever that, however that's then colored in terms of extroverted ethics and extroverted logic.
Yeah, it's really like
So,
my own personal like sensory deprivation tank or something. Like I wear like
yes.
comfy clothes. I don't want to feel that I have like a physical form. It's really
Yeah.
weird.
Mm.
Like I'm just like
Okay,
this floaty
yeah,
thing of ideas or something.
I'm gonna have to cut out I'm gonna have to cut out the extroverted intuition, guys, because we gotta move on. We gotta talk about some of the other types. But
Oh yeah, yeah. We should also
yeah.
give like examples of other elements in the demonstrative, like extroverted sensing, what that
By the way, you're
demonstrative.
gonna get comments here in ILI after this video.
I don't think so.
Just a quick one on that. In terms of the transition I've noticed in myself, I find that when I'm very confident in my environment, when I feel very sort of safe with people around me, I tend to start to add on, the jokes, the humor. I start trying to bend the emotional mores around me, at which point that has in the past backfired, at which point I would retreat back into just keeping things very, very factual.
Mm.
And almost rather than um continue when it becomes a more hostile environment in a social example, rather than just exist in that emotional social environment, I would just withdraw to facts, I would draw to logic, I would draw to sort of the debating side of things, because I know that territory I can feel safe. Okay, I won't necessarily, I can't necessarily be liked here, but at least I can be, be on firm factual territories. I can be not know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's a really interesting description because it's why I get it makes sense why I perceive ILEs, sorry, to either be like really like down to earth and helpful because then they're doing their demonstrative is my dual seeking, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I'm like really attracted to their knowledge, or I see them as sort of like being like a sort of buffoon
yeah,
and the thing that
yeah,
it and what you described makes total sense because it's not just extroverted feeling, it's like extroverted feeling where you have to be liked like the center of attention, which isn't quite the extroverted feeling of say like an ESE or an EIE. And so it needs reassurance, and the reassurance of the extroverted feeling is really a turn off to me. Like when I see
yeah.
ILEs do it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I think there's another aspect to it, but I think it's seen less often, unless there's a relationship that plays out over a long period of time, a high level of closeness, which is that the ILE, although I think an EI will appreciate them giving that factual knowledge and expertise and helping them through things, I think there's the added risk that the ILE will be a lot more blasé about the factual information they're providing than say an LSE or an LIE will, because for the ILE, I don't think they feel the same ownership of the factual information they're giving out and the same sense of this is really important that this is accurate and this is based on something which will necessarily help. And I think that's when there's a potential for an EII or an ESI to feel almost let down or betrayed by the fact that the faction vision was given out so casually.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if I've experienced that. I think for me, I'm just sort of happy that someone's giving me that information. I think the tension for me with supervision is that I feel that it's very asymmetric. So I feel like I really like the ILE and clearly like see them as sort of like above me because they're giving me what I want, but they don't value my leading function as much. And so like I don't like that asymmetry.
Sure. Because Annihilator just would not ask for help in introverted ethics. It just wouldn't happen, basically.
Yeah.
And because this idea that the demonstrative function kind of works best, almost when it's not deliberately asked of the person sort of just handles that in the background. And this idea of demonstrative function is just handled in the background. It's handled loosely. It's not treated as a sort of special thing that only you can do. So you must be very, very precious in holding the other person's suggestive function in taking and taking full responsibility over it like a baby chick. It's more, okay, I don't care about this thing. Just do something with it. And then the demonstrative function just have fun with it.
Yeah. So then the supervisor, I think, feels like they're doing a lot, but getting little credit and an appreciation. But then at the same time, they really like they see the supervisee as like this like bright talent that like they want to be around, but it's like you understand.
Yeah. Let's I'm trying to think of other types. I was thinking just about something I've noticed with SCEs actually, I've spoken to, where in their mobilizing function, they're wanting to establish their competence, a sense of what they can do, but they try to read that sense of competence through how people are reacting to them. And there's this idea, another tension thing with the transition between the demonstrator and the mobilizing, that because the demonstrator provides that quick, instantaneous feedback that the person, trusts that feedback which they're getting, that almost in pursuing one's mobilizing function, that you actually will look for you'll tap into your demonstrator function to give you feedback on how well you're doing in your mobilizing.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
Actually, I can give concrete examples of that. Because something I've noticed, right, professionally, is that it applies to SEs and IEs, right? SEs and IEs, when they are giving technical presentations, they almost always overdo with amount of information, right? So the SE will have a sort of a wall of text, of data, etc., of figures and even equations, if that's the case, right? Because I don't think they're confident in extracting what is really the most important, and they also, I think, they need to show off. Look, guys, I know all of this, right? And I've always noticed that as a very recurring trend, right? But I hadn't realized, Jack, what you said, which is that they would be expecting feedback from the emotional response of the audience. But the problem, of course, is that that's the worst situation for people to get emotional response because, of course, when somebody is giving a technical presentation, everybody pretends to be interested, right? Even if they are bored to death, and they will applaud. So it doesn't really give the proper corrective feedback, right, that they would need. So it's not. I think it's a good example, but I've never put it together the importance of the extroverted feeling part, precisely because there is not really working, right? So, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
That's really, I like that insight a lot. I think also like the simplistic way, that's a real nice subtlety, but I think the simplistic way to describe them, which you've described before, Jack, is like extroverted feeling demonstrative is like effortlessly social, which I really liked because it's like you just see that like they're like really liked by everyone, and they have like new friends every week. Like they have no shortage of friends. They're sort of like, they're sort of like the center of every social network, but they don't seem to like want to be. Like they're not like a typical like queen bee or like mean girl, or it's just like it just sort of like seems to happen or something.
So I'm liked, but I don't need to be liked. Is that kind of idea?
Yeah. And it's really interesting how it happens because and when you observe it, it is really, really different from like the way that an EIE would be the center of a social network, or an ESE, or even an ILE, because they don't you can tell that they like don't place like any stock in it, kind of.
And even telling them that they are, very popular, that they almost will respond almost like, that's not
Yeah, yeah,
necessarily
yeah,
how I
yeah.
want even want to see myself.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. Um,
Hmm.
I think for extroverted sensing, and you guys could probably better fill this in because like obviously my understanding of extroverted sensing is poor. But from observing LSEs and ESEs, I would describe them as like sort of like effortlessly ambitious. Like they sort of they reject sort of conventional notions of ambition. They don't want to just chase money. They don't want to chase status, blah, blah, blah. But like they sort of can't help but like rise to the top in everything they do, you know?
They just
Um,
do stuff.
they,
Yeah,
they, they just do stuff. Whether they always rise to the top, that's not a story. But
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, I think the SE demo types, like you're seeing them just basically, they're not using the SE to kind of like overcome anything necessarily, but they're using that towards like, well, let's explore this possibility. What if we did things this way? Or let's interact with these people. Like, so it's more of like harnessed towards like more exploratory ends. It's kind of serving the NE a bit more as opposed to just like, well, how am I gonna make an impact on the world, or overcome this challenge? Is more just like, yeah, I'm using this energy to explore and interact with and do the things that I'm interested in, and they do it with like a lot of energy and gusto, and the forcefulness is just kind of incidental to what they're really interested in.
Yeah, I would say that the ASEs and LSEs, I would say that they naturally they put a lot of work. I think that's exactly what into what they are interested in, which may be just the work, right? For instance, the stereotypical, very hardworking, they have very efficient secretary, right? ESE secretary, right? So she because she just got into that work and she does very well and she focuses on, etc. And then she becomes very good secretary. In the case of the LSE, and I think Rita will probably appreciate that, they will be very hardworking in what they do, what they're interested in, or they want to do. However, they won't necessarily choose wisely what it is that they are actually putting the energy on.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's like kind of crazy, which is very different. Like we've spoken about this, about like types that need to conserve energy. So like an LSE will just work all the time, but in a kind of like slow, constant, like continuous, like churn. Like they're always like at it. It's like like they wake up and they like are working. Whereas I will wake up, have like absolutely no energy, and they'll say to me something like, "Are you gonna work? Are you gonna do something?" And I'm like, "Wait, I have to build up the energy to do so." And what's happening actually with me is probably introverted intuition, where I'm sort of like the sort of the process that's going on in the background, like throughout time, is my brain figuring out like how to optimize my work so that when I put the effort in, I can just sort of do it and then sign off. But I can never do the sort of like continuous, just like pumping out at like a medium drip for their entire 24 hours of their day that an
Yeah.
LSE does.
Yeah, because for the LSE, I think the activity itself becomes the goal, right?
Yeah.
Whether the activity is efficient, that's not a story. That goes to that whole comment by Nikola Tesla or Thomas Edison, that instead of that he was do things by sort of mindless empiricism, right? And that, for instance, is that if you would literally have to find a needle in a haystack, he would just examine every haystack one by bit until he finds a needle, while Tesla would just find a magnet and get the needle out.
Tesla was that's a relationship with supervision.
Indeed.
No, yeah,
I think
that
so.
makes sense.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
I mean, whether Tesla was an ILI or an LII, that's of course a discussion, right? But the effect is the same. Is the fact that the LSI is a non-stop worker, but in a way that is not necessarily the best way of but most efficient way at arriving at something concrete. That's my
Yeah, but
Yeah,
one
no, I
thing
get
that's
that.
interesting to me with LSEs is what I've learned from them, which may seem obvious to everyone, but not me because I'm extroverted sensing polar, is that continuous work, even if work is sort of like slow and not very like intense, if it's done all the time, you get further than just doing like little bursts like I do.
Yeah, sure.
It's a bit like if you let's say you have a Chat GPT account or you have a Claude, and you have on one account you only have a few credits to use each week, and so you're very sparing and very considerate in what you use those credits on because you're going to run out after a few actions. So you really have to make it count. And I think that's the case for most introverted intuitive types. Whereas for, say, an LSE, it's like you have infinite, you have no credit limit. You can just keep working and working, 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 and basically you have 3 to 4 different tasks, and it's not as carefully thought out in terms of okay, where is this going? What is this leading to? You just trust if you work on enough things, if you cover all the different bases, you will at some point get to the right answer.
Okay, yeah, this is a good point too, because this is where I have observed conflict with my dual, right? And so I was finding it a little difficult to pinpoint concrete examples, but here's a concrete example where okay, so I worked for someone who was an LSE. It would be like a little bit like throwing shit at a wall. Like it would just be like one thing after another and like, oh, there's lots of opportunities, and he was always working on everything all the time all at once, right? And I can't work like that. But every once in a while, he would give me something to do, and I would say, well, that's obviously prone to not succeed. And he would say, like, you don't know that. You
That's
can't
the
predict it.
rejection of introverted intuition.
And I would say, yeah, like I can't I can't project the future. I can't predict the future, but like that's less likely to succeed than something else, right? In my opinion. And it would really annoy me when he would not take that criticism and like essentially force me to be involved in something that I okay, here's where my demonstrative seems to become very valued. In particular at work, and maybe it's because I have to expend energy, so this is really where it gets me upset. If I think something will go a certain way and people don't listen to me, I can't just like sit back and let it happen. Like I kind of say like it's going to be like this, and people will say, "How do you know?" And I'm like, "Cuz I know." And then And then it gives me a little bit like people say I have a Cassandra complex because frequently I end up being right. But then what bothers me is like, I don't want to be the person to have to put in the work to correct the thing when it happens exactly the way it
Yeah.
happens that I was warning people about. Like, and that's why I get mad.
But
I
sorry,
don't know.
but is that, I mean, I've been in this situation countless times myself, but isn't that not just a question of intuitive thinking or intuition, right? It's also a
I
question
don't
of,
know.
wait. It's not just intuitive intuition. Intuitive intuition is what makes you focus on that. But in order to be able to predict that something is going to not work or go badly, etc., you need some knowledge of if you need some or knowledge on that, right? Which that I think that's the combination that leads to this Cassandra thing. Not only I have my mind focuses on projecting the direction, but I have a base of knowledge to project it, right? And
Well, maybe
sometimes
that's why I get so frustrated because I think it should
Like,
be obvious that people realize that I'm the more knowledgeable person in that area, and when it's not acknowledged. But
well,
I don't know what.
sometimes people make a point of not acknowledging it precise because they are showing you that me as well. Okay, so this person thinks they're so knowledgeable. Now I'm going to see them with egg on the face, right? That things all the time, right?
But sorry.
I was just saying, I can empathize a bit. Like there were things that I would notice, like as like a kid, like as like a young kid, and I hadn't even hit puberty yet, and I would notice certain trends and behavior, and I would just warn the stuff. Sometimes years in advance, and I would tell people, it's like, hey, if you keep up doing this X, Y, and Z, it's gonna turn out like this. And I just obviously I would get dismissed, and then years later it turned out exactly as I warned, and nobody even remembered that I said it was going to.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean
no, that's awful.
that's no, but that's the point, right? Uh, Nobody remembers it. Okay, this is something that one has to live with.
Right,
Yeah,
Daniel,
but
what are your thoughts?
you know why this is so frustrating for me?
Yeah,
Go ahead, go ahead and finish, and then I'll speak. Go ahead and
yeah,
finish, and
then
I'll
you
speak.
look very
No,
bored. So
No, finish what you were gonna
no,
say.
that's all I had to
What's
say.
frustrating?
I thought
Okay,
Jack had
okay,
something to say, so I was
okay,
asking
okay.
Jack.
No. I mean, look, I guess on this applies more to ESCs than LSCs, but I think that ESCs can be well-meaning, but I think that unknowingly sometimes they can be kind of pushy, authoritarian, maybe
They
even a
can be really
reflexive
pushy.
authoritarian. Yeah, and sometimes again, but that's not their intention. They don't want to come across that way, but sometimes they don't realize that they're coming across that way.
I've
Um,
seen LIIs and EIIs yell at ESEs and be like, back off, you're being pushy.
Yeah.
And then the ESE goes, what? I just trying to help or something like.
Yeah. Well, actually, extra thing of that is a thought I had. I've seen examples, especially ESCs, maybe LSCs as well, almost not owning their douchebaggery. An
Yeah.
SLE or an SCE, they will own their douchebaggery. They identify with that douchebaggery at times. But I find that an ESC, it's like, no, I'm a nice person, even though they
Yeah,
are then being
yeah.
a total douchebag, and they just will not own it. And it's almost the extrovert sensation types that either mobilizing or leading will get frustrated with that because yeah, you can be a douchebag, but own your douchebaggery. Identify with it, please. Don't pretend you're going to be a nice, soft, kind, open person after you just done that and you just shouted that thing out, or you just totally took control of that conversation, or you just shut that down because you didn't think it was polite enough.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
the only other thing I was gonna say was I mean what you were speaking about earlier in this video about how if you feel comfortable, then you'll engage in extroverted ethics. If you're not feeling comfortable, then you won't. You'll stick to more kind of just matter of fact. And I guess like the example of this that comes to mind is Donald Trump. If you look at the progression of how the way he speaks in his interviews throughout the years, if you look at the videos in the 80s, it's very matter of fact, very dry, whereas now it's quite the opposite.
yeah, no,
So
but in this case, I think is the in his case, right? Because I think that we're seeing the opposite. Because yes, if you look at any interview of him in the 80s, he is very dry and speaking about technical, knowledgeable real estate and construction stuff, right? And I think was because he didn't feel confident.
Yes.
Strangely enough, he didn't feel
Yes.
confident enough to quote unquote make a fool of herself, focusing on the mobilizing.
Yeah.
As he got older and gave less of a concern about this, and especially after he got confidence in The Apprentice. Now, of course, he's focusing on extroverted. I think he gets drunk on extroverted feeling, right? He gets it's like a mobilizing extroverted sensing person getting drunk with power, right? And I think it's similar, but because I mean, we don't know if when he's tired in private, if he focuses on P again, right? As we don't know, but what he's now sort of, that's my interpretation, right? He's gorged on his mobilizing function, right? It makes him feel great about himself. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, no, I think that's correct. Yeah.
And I think that's it. Demonstrative function, I think, is rarely seen as insufferable. It's the mobilized function is seen as insufferable because it's overpushed. Demonstrative function is sort of a sudden fallback on once the thing which you really, really think is important you tried it, it's failed, you go back to it. Which is why I say when it comes to ESCs and LSCs, I think it's that sort of right. The tough the gloves are coming off now because I tried to be open, but this was just too much. I need to now take control of the situation, need to act, which some people don't, of course, like. I'm just wondering, what type have we not talked about yet?
Oh, sorry, just one example, like William Buckley, also the way he like gets angry. We haven't brought that up, but that's like very LSE in the throes of SE, right? They can anger and be like very scary and like convincingly scary when they when triggered.
You mean I'll suck your goddamn face and stay plastered?
What?
You're talking about the moment where he said to Gore Vidal, "I'll suck your goddamn face."
Oh yeah. That's the moment. Yeah.
So just to confirm, that was I'll sock, just to make sure people know that
was
this.
A sock. Yeah.
Very 1950s gang slang.
Yeah.
I think each of the different demonstratives, but not necessarily from all of the types. We talked about I demonstrative or NE demonstrative in the abstract, or TI in abstract. Of course, they're going to be different depending on the type. But yeah, I think we went through each of the 8 elements though.
Yeah. I think I want to. I think that for instance, something that's more empirical, right? For instance, something that in the case of because I do think that the demonstrative is often seen in what you do as a hobby, right? Although for instance, in the case of SLIs, they often like to solve puzzles, and this kind of mechanical puzzle where, for instance, you had a little jar and then you have some sort of stuck of wood with a sort of a nail, and you have to somehow to find a way of getting that stuff out of your jar, even if it doesn't seem like you can do it. You know what I'm talking about? This kind of
I do.
That's the kind of stuff that when I have seen SLIs at work, right, often that's the kind of stuff that they like to do as a hobby to relax, right? I don't, because to me it's just I have no idea, and it's a waste of time, right? But they like and also solving, and for those that are more theoretically inclined, even solving statistical puzzles, right? This data makes no sense, so I just use a lot of data to try to see what's the solution for that, but they do that as a hobby.
Or chess. I know an SLI.
They focus on L as a form of relaxation, for instance. That's my point.
Yeah, I know an SLI who's really into chess as a hobby, which is
Yeah.
a really good, I think, example of L. And so ILI that I know, like my dad is an ILI, and so it's not a puzzle, but similarly with L, but I think with more of maybe more of an intuitive bent. So he really likes, like, when I was a kid, he would always read like car magazines and like computer magazines. So he really likes to know like how things work, like like how engines work in a car or how like a computer functions
Yeah,
and
but
like all of
that's
the
yeah,
different
yeah.
parts.
That's the yeah. Although this is more, I would say this is more P connected to
Yeah,
S, right? That's
I think
more of
that's
a
right.
so yeah. I think this is a
Let
bit.
me ask you this, Peter, because obviously Marlon Brando is one of your favorite people. You wrote a blog post on him, but you didn't really focus on the P aspects. I was reading that he designed like an air conditioner that uses seawater. Um,
I mean,
and
okay, okay. I mean, okay, Marlon Brando, right? Okay, his P went all over the place, right? I think that his P is visible in the sense that uh, no matter what idiotic decisions he took in his life, he never actually went bankrupt, right?
yeah,
He
uh,
he would he bought that sort of the atoll of Tetiaroa, right? Just because he thinks the place and spent a lot of money there, and then he would just work in a movie once every 10 years because to make money. But with all of that, he never. When he died, he had left, I think, a $20 million estate, which for a big actor maybe little, but is significant. So, with all of this, all of the crazy ideas that he had, and a lot of, like for instance, like he actually thought that apparently it's not a joke. He actually thought that he could power his hotel using electrical eels, right, for a while. This kind of a ridiculous idea from somebody who has just a very limited knowledge and then thinks he can extrapolate from that. But he had a sort of instinctive P in the sense that, as I said, no matter how many idiotic, wasteful ideas he had, he never ruined himself financially, right? So that's one of the things that's where I see he did, for instance. There are some of the other guys, right? Like I mean, Michael Jackson, Johnny Depp, right? That spend money like water. If anything happens to make their flow of cash stop, then they are immediately bankrupt, right? That never happened to him. So that's the best example I can give of
sure.
P. In terms of P as in communication, yeah, I mean he would be charming, etc. When you wanted to get something out of you, when you wanted to bullshit you during a movie, right? So that it could work less, all of these things. But if not on a sort of interaction, he would just be very dry and to the point, etc. He had no time to be charming, right? So that's the how I think the P fits very well. Actually, if I go back to it, I of course I would rewrite that lame
Sure.
blog article that I did. But that's the P aspect.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, the only other thing I was going to say was that he seemed to have quite expansive interests outside of acting.
Yeah, of course,
Uh,
because
yeah,
he thought acting was something stupid. Actually, he
yeah,
thought acting was a stupid career for a man to do. But it was the only one, as it said, that he could make so much money, and he spent most of his time doing nothing. Right? But he thought the career as such was stupid.
yes, yes.
Which is a very kind of P way to look at it, actually.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
I've said this in the other video, but for LSIs and to a certain extent ESIs, I think they always do like the introverted sensing thing plays out in the kind of activities that they like to do. So like LSIs, for instance, lots of LSI men that I know like mountain biking. So it's usually like these like solitary non-group physical activities where you're like out in nature and you're sort of like forced, like there is an interplay with extroverted sensing because they're grittier, they require like a lot more resilience, they're more dangerous. But they are fundamentally like about like you being in nature and like being in touch with your body and like pushing it to a limit or something, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
I will say,
think
as far as myself goes, I mean, I've done open water swimming, which is kind of interesting because it is a solitary sport, but it's not like a pool. It's not a controlled environment. So there's kind of these external variables of nature you need to take into account. I don't know if that would count as an example of what you mean, but
Yeah, I think so.
But I think there the F aspect is also very dominant as well.
Yeah, but that's sort of my point. There's like this interesting, like as we've spoken about earlier in the video, like interplay of like an introverted sensing activity, but that like plays very well with extroverted sensing in a way that someone who is purely introverted sensing would probably not like.
And like stuff
I
like
don't Kimani.
I think you're,
No, go ahead, go
yeah.
ahead.
He's muted. He's
no, not muted. No, I'm just saying.
okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. What you're getting at, they have like focused physical activities that they have to pass the time. So something that they can kind of be singularly focused on something that involves like using their body or interacting with the environment in some way. But it's just very like there's a finish line type focus to it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's, I mean, they can also be kind of like indulgent in like food. I think Peter, like you've observed this, but like,
Sorry, with
um,
which type?
well, like with ESIs and LSIs, like they can also be pretty indulgent in food with they can, there are like hedonistic elements, but then they sort of,
Okay. Okay. From an empirical observation, right? I have observed the inclination to be indulgent with food more in ESIs than in LSIs, right? That's my empirical observation. I'm not going to make a case that is intrinsic to types. That ESIs, that I have a few cases to observe, is that they would rather eat very well and eat substantially, and in order to maintain their weight, then they would do something else on top of it, right? Which is to do either to exercise a lot or etc. or something else, right? While with the LSIs, I tend to think they find this balance more naturally, right? So they would just so that's my observation, which I don't know if I can explain specifically, right? But that has been my observation in several cases, right? Which causes the ESI as a problem, of course, if they reach, let's say, around 40, and then the metabolism often shift gears, and then this balance between eating and exercise changes, right? So that's being my observation. But that applies, as I said, to ESIs rather than to LSIs in my experience. Now, I cannot, apart from making some obvious comments, connecting it somehow to L rather than R, maybe if you have R and S, you are going to be more fonder of eating well, but that sounds to me like a very contrived argument. I cannot right now explain why ESIs should be different from LSIs in this regard.
One thing which I've noticed is a kind of Cincinnatus effect for LSIs and ESIs. The idea that almost after going on this pursuing one's fate, one's destiny, whatever it is, finding that pathway forwards in terms of introverted intuition, they then return back to the farm. They retire back to the certain physical space, the base, whatever it is, and they live out their day-to-day pursuits. They have a sort of far more grounded day-to-day existence. They tend to then live quite a bit longer. It's not quite like the PG described, say, I think it was Lyndon B. Johnson in SCE, who after reaching the very, very pinnacle, he then basically it just got very, very fat and died.
Yeah, no,
It's instead more of a going back to sort of a healthy, balanced retirement.
yeah, no, okay, okay. Lyndon Johnson, right? I don't know. Lyndon Johnson. What happened was that when he was president, he stopped smoking. He ate well, etc. The moment that he left the White House, he basically said, "Okay, now I'm going to do what I want," and he smoked a lot, drank a lot, and ate whatever he wanted, which means that in something like 3 years, he had a heart attack and died.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
in,
I
his,
think
in his early 60s. So
yeah, this is sort of not totally formed, but I'm thinking of like, for instance, Victoria Beckham is LSI and Ivanka Trump, I think, is ESI.
yeah.
And so like what I see from them is that they both have like this ability to, but again, this is like an interplay of both extroverted sensing and introverted sensing, where they've sort of been able to successfully monetize like their lifestyles. So like Ivanka had, you know, like a brand of like clothing wear or whatever before Trump took office. And Victoria has like a beauty line and like a like clothing line, etc. But they both do give the appearance of how can I explain this? Like as like a female, they come across as like kind of like pretty accessible. Like they have this element of like a very down to earth, like almost like being like a big sister that I
Really?
think makes them, yeah, like even though like
Okay.
Victoria was like posh spice, so she was like aloof and like mysterious and like the hot one, whatever. She does have this element of being sort of like a girl's girl where she like does these instructional videos on how to put on makeup, and she seems sort of like
Totally.
kind of like, you know, and she says like of herself, like I wasn't like the cool girl, like blah blah blah. So I think that sometimes women with like introverted sensing, demonstrative, they can have this aspect of like helping you sort of like achieve your best self kind of thing.
Yeah, but totally there is. I would think, right? I would think that that women like them, right? I think in their case, the extroverted sensing, right, would be what allows them to have the discipline and the awareness to keep them in shape, because of course they
Yes.
have to keep them in perfect physical shape, because that's what they're, otherwise that's the whole business model collapses. Right. So that is one thing, right? So that's one aspect of it. I mean, it's a kind of, since you're talking about celebrities, is the kind of very constant, very rigid discipline that, for instance, Britney Spears apparently doesn't have. Right? She would be sort of go through fits and starts. Right? She would be very fit. Then she would do nothing, and then she'll gain weight, and then she would go through. No, now I have to get fit. So she have this yo-yo effect, which these two you mentioned don't seem to have. Right? It's sort of more of a constant, really rational and discipline. And the S thing about the sort of makeup, etc. I think it's something that comes naturally to them, because it's just okay. It's just S stuff, which they find naturally easy to focus on. That would be my interpretation. What do you think?
But my point is that when they do, they seem sort of like approachable about it. Like there is like an approachability where like they're not sort of like a Zen like Earth Mother, you know, like a typical S1 SEI, but they do have, there is this kind of like natural beauty, like do what you like here, we're trying to improve your natural look or something, like approachability to their
Okay,
like the
I
way
can't
they talk
comment
about
because
things.
I had no idea that they even did that. So
And I would also add, for instance, I was looking at Russell Crowe recently, and
yeah.
I noted that Russell Crowe he has a farm. He has this
Mhm.
this sort of big farm, and it's not like, say, I looked contrast, say, Oprah. Oprah has a number of rural properties, but it's like a portfolio of properties. It's again more about branding. It's a portfolio. It's money
Yeah.
making, right? Sure, vegetables are grown. That's not. She's not directly involved in it.
Oh,
Russell Crowe has a farm, but he calls his sanctuary, right? When he's not doing the method, the acting, the craft, he is in chilling out on his farm. He has gone back from the noble cause to, which he takes very, very, very seriously, too seriously, to I'm chilling out on my farm, I'm in my sort of retirement, that sort of
yeah.
thing.
So it's like Brando with his atoll in Tahiti, right? The same thing.
Mm. So is it a toll of was he a toll in Tahiti for Brando, more like a sort of like a retiring sanctuary sort of place? Is it?
Okay, it is okay. He bought it because he liked it when he was there making the Mutiny on the Bounty movie, and then at first he went there at very sort of basic conditions just to stay there and do nothing, in contact with nature, and
Mm.
then gradually he thought, okay, I could do something out of this, right? In terms of developing it and maybe have some controlled flow of tourism, etc., and do some sort of pseudo ecological experiments, etc. There is a movie with Billy
Yeah,
Zane,
yeah.
which only Dan saw, Waltzing with Brando, which is about how that was made, right? So he, uh, but he was sort of torn between trying to make something out of it
Yeah,
commercially,
yeah,
and
yeah.
just have it as his own private paradise, right? And I suppose Crow, maybe I don't know about. You can tell me about Crow. I didn't know
It's
about Crow.
definitely a private paradise for Crow.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay, so I think Brando, he thought, I think with him, I think he saw that, okay, this in terms of money, this has become a white elephant, so I need to get some money out of it to keep it going, but I don't want to just make it into a money. Now it is now after he died, they developed it into a hotel, etc., luxury resort. That's of course, but that is precisely what he didn't want to do, right? He wanted to keep the private paradise as the most important thing. I think that maybe that makes the comparison more.
Oh,
yeah.
you know what else actually? So this idea like where SI Demonstrative, they monetize their like lifestyle thing in like an approachable way. Paul Newman's another good example.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah,
like
his salad, yeah, his salad.
yeah, well, not just salad, like Newman Organics. Like so he had a whole brand of like organic food. But again, it was like it was like very well monetized. It was monetized so that there's the extroverted sensing part, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
not just doing it, you know, to because he like loves it, but also um again, like very accessible, like to Americans who never thought about organic food and like sort of thought it was like some hippy dippy bullshit. Like they ended up like really appreciating his products.
Mm. Okay, no, that's fair.
Kind
In
of
fact, I
reminds me.
think Human Organics was even the coffee that was like I think for like a long time, maybe even still, McDonald's ended up serving Paul Newman's coffee.
I had no idea. Okay, fair enough. To be honest, I wasn't aware of all of this. I knew that he's not even salad. He started out with his salad dressing.
Yeah, that's his main his main product was in fact salad dressing, but he had lots of products like he had coffee, like he had frozen pizza, stuff like that. where they're sort of like healthier alternatives to like American junk.
I didn't know that, but it is very very interesting. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, and of course, he do that, but also he like to pilot car, to do car racing, right? Which of course is a F activity. So
yeah, but again, like something like borders on S2 in the solitary kind of like, you know, it's like mountain biking or whatever.
And also I just draw some contrast by the way with someone like Jeremy Clarkson and his farm, where his approach to his farm, it's definitely not his private sanctuary. It is his big money maker. And where for him it's the whole idea, and not even a moneymaker where he just does things which actually sell, because the only thing which actually ever sold well were the mushrooms. It was more that he makes all the money by drawing people into his life on the farm and the various harebrained schemes he comes up with in order to make money. And it's as if he's almost it's an experimental sandbox where he's always trying to introduce another thing on the farm and trying to get that thing to work or try and get this thing to work. So I see sort of a playfulness and extroverted logic, whereas just going to contrast with Russell Crowe or other people in sort of cosmetic products or high quality organic products, or just having a place just to chill out, it would be more of an introverted sensation.
I can tell you he's not very popular there in that area, Chippy Norton.
I know all the disruption to
that's my partner's sister's area, right? And they really don't like him that he's there.
Yeah, I used to live near there actually, but yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I like, by the way, sorry, this is tangential to Jeremy Clarkson. I do like his show, by the way, the one that's like Jeremy Clarkson's farm or whatever. It's quite funny, but like obviously it's not really about the farm. It's about like his ridiculous escapades. But yeah, I like this idea of demonstrative being the least insufferable version of the element. Like it's the most approachable. Like if you hate introverted sensing, the way that an introverted sensing demonstrative type will do it is still approachable. Like my mother loved Newman organic products, right? And she's like an EIE, right? So if you hate if your polar is R, the way that an R8 type presents R is like the most approachable, the least, whereas mobilizing is the most insufferable. Like
if you overdo it, but people tend to overdo it.
I've been told that I'm an intelligent person who doesn't make the other person feel unintelligent.
That's a very high praise.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of praise you like to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have in my life I have heard the opposite.
Which makes sense because it's a leading function rather than a demonstrative function.
Yeah, no, and of course goes back to the role thing that with mobilized that I thought, right? That's why I disagreed. I questioned that the role function isn't necessarily stronger than mobilizing. I think that your immobilizing is better than my role, for instance.
In some aspects. I don't know.
The role kind of used in a leisurely kind of way if it's like focused on at all. So like like comparing it to the mobilizing is definitely gonna be like a lot more visible in the person. It's bold, it's stubborn, it has like almost everything going for it except for strength. So it's just like this really loud try hard function that don't value the function is going to rub them in the wrong way. Kind of like what you were saying before. It's the opposite of the demonstrative.
Yeah,
What's the insufferable use of introvert sensing? I'm curious. Wait, sorry, Peter, go ahead.
Well, no, you go ahead. What's the question?
No, say the thing you were, because mine's a question.
No, because I thought of an interesting example, right? A guy who managed to be, despite his success, he managed to be extremely irritating. which is Nicolas Sarkozy, who is an LIE, and and he had to focus on E, right, to be a politician, right, and give speeches, etc., and play the backslapping politician. But also, he was very over, especially when he became president, right? He became very focusing on F, as in, okay, now I become the president. Now I have this new hot wife. Now I can do this. Now I can do that. Now I am the guy. Now I have all the power, etc. So he managed to, by focusing on his F in a sort of over the top way, and by also over focusing on his Z in a clumsy way, he managed to make himself, he managed to piss everybody off, right? That's my interpretation.
Yeah, I think extroverted sensing, maybe it's easier to see the insufferability of the mobilizing when it's an extroverted function.
Yeah, that's very possibly, yeah.
Because I'm trying to think of cases like, what's an example of like insufferable introverted sensing? Like, what would I do that's like,
Okay.
Hypochondria. Hypochondria.
don't pull any punches, Jack.
Okay. No. I won't point it directly at you. I point it at examples I've seen in other EIIs, for instance.
Okay.
I know an EII, for instance, whose partner finds it difficult sometimes when, for instance, she has to. She almost manages when she comes into the bedroom because her partner is an EII. The slightest thing will totally throw off his sleeping, and he needs it to be so fine-tuned, otherwise he can't almost bring himself back to relaxation. And it's that sort of need. Okay, I need things to look or feel or be in this particular way, otherwise I don't really know how to readjust to my physical surroundings at that point. Or, oh no, you touched that, you moved that, oh no. And it's that sort of inability to then adjust to the change in their physical environment and needing it to be just so that they can feel safe in their environment, they can feel balanced or in their homeostasis in their environment.
Yeah, I think I avoid that by just avoiding the environment altogether. But I get no, it's true, but I get very like if I'm in an environment that's very like messy or cluttered, like it really bothers me. Like I kind of can't like balance my energy. It like feels really weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'll sometimes start cleaning up people, like organizing people's houses.
Yeah. Which I've known SEIs do. My sister organized our drawer because she felt it was too messy. So she took it upon herself to organize the drawer. And it's that kind of idea where your responsibility is the introverted sensation, whether it's leading or it's mobilizing. But I think an EII does it in a far more fragile way than an SEI will or an SLI will. It's like it has to be this way. That once, I think, because the EII has those two modes, they're just withdrawing into their mental palace because they're not yet confident enough, and that's when it's not insufferable. But when the EAI does invest in their physical surroundings, that's when it starts to have to be just so, and you have to almost tiptoe around how they've made it just so, because if you move something, or if you disturb something, or if you change this thing, they don't really know how to bring it back, and it would be very stressful for them. And it's very much tiptoe environment.
And then it's like, how could you do this to me? You're so inconsiderate.
Yes. And yeah, I think in terms of other, but again, this is more mobilizing function territory. So I think maybe we're going off topic now. But yeah.
Demonstrative. So okay, we've given good examples of introverted sensing, extroverted sensing, I think. I've given a lot about introverted intuition. Well, one thing I'll say, one more thing about introverted intuition. Like so for instance, like I have an LII friend. For some reason, like he and I both have some like unexplained interest in like Russian history and literature, right? Because it sort of makes sense for an introverted intuition demonstrative, like Russian culture, the history, it's very like introverted intuition heavy. Like for for no particular reason, I took a Russian literature class in college. For no particular reason, he took a Russian history class in college. And we both sort of have this like interest in this culture. Like I think it's weird, but and I think he thinks it's weird too, but we both sort of like it. Like, right? Like it's like a hobby interest that is like without explanation, right?
No, that's interesting. I think that is interesting because, and I for some reason, right? I think that beta T types, if they have a sort of this kind of interest, they tend to be attracted to ancient Egypt, right? Because of the most obvious sort of mysticism. But in your case in Russia, it is just somewhat mystic, right? With the whole of the Orthodox, etc. So maybe anyway, but it's not too much. Anyway, does make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not overtly like it's not overt, but it's the culture is like sort of implicitly built around it.
No, yeah, yeah. I mean, it does have a few things that immediately strike as a slightly weird, yes.
Yeah, I do find that Russia has that interesting dialectic between this almost the soulful but yet tortured aspect of it, and then on the other hand, the brutal cynical, and how those two almost work in tandem.
Yeah, I like that a lot about it, actually. There's like this harsh reality, and then there's this like romantic idealism that like superstitious idealism, and like they're both so extreme, and like they sort of balance each other out, but in a way that they're both sort of, I would say, like not correct, but it's interesting to me.
But also there is an underlying streak of sentimentality, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I know exactly what you mean, right? It's interesting.
The Russian heart overflows, or something like that. I mean, there's this guy described himself as having a Russian heart, even though he had an English father. It was interesting.
Okay, so we did introverted intuition. And we did extroverted intuition. Well, we really didn't do extroverted intuition that well.
Yeah, Pete, you let the side down there.
I know, but I mean, I don't know. As I said, I explained it in the context of it uses stuff that for instance, I mean, what can I explain? What can I say, right? For instance, it is just this inclination of focusing on very strange, very in a multitude of interests and hobbies. Not hobbies, topics, right? Especially when I lack the concentration to focus on work. Like, for instance, I've been discussing with AI lots of ideas regarding history and regarding alternative theories, etc. Right? With AI, also with ChatGPT, with Grok, and with Gemini, just to see, okay, how far can I go with this, right? And I shift between them very, very quickly and very easily. But of course, I also think, okay, why am I doing this? I should be focusing on something more productive. But now I have a lot in my mind, and then I don't. Right, so that's one of the manifestations of it, right? So I think, Jack, that your use of extroverted intuition is more controlled and actually more focused, right? You decide that you're going to explore a particular idea and you do it, while mine is more is more chaotic because is a consequence of a failure in self-discipline, right? Which means that it is necessarily more chaotic, right? That's the best way that I can explain it.
I think for me, there's a decided openness in that I am just saying I am allowing and saying yes to things coming my way. And for me, I will decide to keep it open rather than shut it off, which is the key thing. And then when I decide that something is to be kept open, it's very hard for someone to tell me not to keep it open. And those occasions when I have closed things, it's very, very hard for someone to then tell me to then open it again. But normally it's open. Yeah, and I think the LIE is less decided in that quality of how open or how closed to be, wanting, I think, to be more closed, yet despite themselves ending up being very, very open.
Yeah, I mean, but of course, right? Then if I suddenly somebody steers me into, okay, now you have to focus on important productive stuff, then I do it, and I for the moment I close the things, as you say, right? So that's the best I can explain it. That's precisely why I started focusing, explaining it as a sort of moving as interacting with F, right? Because that's the way I experienced it. Now going back to another point that when I am using obviously if I am using my creative right in the context of together with my leading, there will be this also this work of the extroverted intuition together with introverted intuition and the extroverted thinking in a way that I find it difficult now to sort of separate. Okay, okay, this is this extroverted intuition, this introverted intuition, but this is when they are working together, right? What I described about my sort of undisciplined, unfocused indulgence in just exploring several subjects, that is when I am actually sort of, that's when I think I am in a purely demonstrative function mode. I think that's the best I can explain it.
I would. So like my father is LIE, right? So he's in any demonstrative. A lot of times we'll have conversations just like, and mine kind of goes all over the place, and we'll end up going on like different tangents and whatnot. But even when I was younger, like as a kid, like my role in the conversation was just kind of like to bring it back on to like the original like topic, because I would just like mentally where we were at. So like when my dad gets lost on like all the side tangents, oh well, yeah, we were talking about this. He's oh yeah, thank you, and then we'll just continue on the little linear conversation path that we were on.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense.
One thing I've observed in sorry, Jack, were you gonna say something?
Just a very, very, very quick one. This is in regards to how extrovert intuition, I think in terms of the transition aspect of it, can show up in EIEs. And I think in terms of that fallback when you're less confident in and of yourself. So when it comes to EIEs, I think, when they're confident, they can become almost insufferable in terms of the extrovert sensation and almost this sort of becoming too intense in their environment. But when they're not sure of themselves and where they stand in terms of their power dynamics with others, they fall back into their extroverted intuition. And this is when it becomes all about the various negative possibilities which can be taking place. What are the many ways in which things could go wrong? And I've experienced this with someone who is kind of on their way to being a celebrity, where I'm not allowed to say who they are and what their relationship is to me because that's part of the problem here, right? And they will be so paranoid about how anyone could do anything against them potentially in the future. And so, because they're seeing all the different ways and possibilities in which they could take the information and use that against them in this situation, and they may be forced to say this thing years from now in that way, they're like so controlling over terms of what information actually gets out. And so it's this idea of, and I remember speaking to this person thinking, but you know they're not going to do this. You know it's very unlikely. No, that person could turn around to me, and that person in the other side of that audition table could, I don't know, could take that thing I said and talk to that person and say that thing, and that could be the end of my career in that particular way. And it's like, okay, proportionality, likelihood here. But I think this is what happens when an EIE, at least, is less confident in themselves in terms of where they stand with others, and they're still approaching things with the values of extrovert sensation, what this person could use against me, but
Yeah,
then drawing on their extrovert intuition for that.
actually,
Yeah, that's a really good example. And it also highlights interplay with introvert intuition. Yeah, sorry, Peter.
no, I'm going to say, yeah, I saw manifestations of that even in people who have had no intention or possibility of ever becoming celebrities.
Yeah.
This need of controlling their image, right? Like, for instance, if somebody takes a picture of them, right, when they're not looking, even if it is completely innocuous, they may want to look, okay, what's the picture like? And if they don't like it, they say, please delete it. Even if it is totally innocuous, right? Even if it's not a celebrity, right? They just want they get nervous if they lose control of their image, right? So maybe because I guess, right, it could eventually backfire into them, even if realistically speaking, that's completely absurd, right? I think, is that make sense to you, Jack?
Yes. And at the end of the day, I get it, right? Stranger things have happened. And if they keep open that possibility, the fact that that possibility is open, because they can see the possibility and get across all the different possibilities, where they feel they have responsibility over, which is the image, and they're standing, they will read that they're standing through the possibilities in a sort of very sort of negative fallback way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this. Sorry.
No. Yeah, it is. No. Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, go on.
I think that's really like a good description of extroverted intuition in EIE. I was gonna say it's a little bit more, it's more superficial for sure, but like anecdotally, I think that extroverted intuition demonstrative types, generally speaking, are the kind of people that would easily get the label of like clever, actually, along with extroverted intuition leading types, but so it's not quite specific, but I think they often are like clever. Like they give you the impression of like clever. Like there's like an alacrity to their problem solving, right? So like one thing I've observed with EIEs is that they're really good at like lateral thinking puzzles, you know, those kinds of like riddles and things where it's like the really like one of them is, you know, that riddle where it's like a child goes to the hospital and the doctor, you know, after being with his father, and the doctor says, I can't operate on this child, he's my son, and like what relationship to the doctor, and you know, and everyone's like, I don't know, and it ends up being that it's the mother, right? Like an EIE will always be like, oh yeah, it's the mother, right? Like you know, they don't tend to they are able to like not be confined by they're able to not be thrown off in like being confined to like a sort of rigidity of the context. They're always open to all of the explanations, so they won't successfully go down that like wrong path and then be unable to generate the correct answer, right?
Yes.
So they can be really, really clever.
Yes.
And then sorry, there was one other thing I was gonna say about EIEs.
Is that mastery of perspective, which I think the LIEs and the EIEs are bringing there, that richness in seeing the possibilities and the outcomes together. Yeah.
In my head canon, I kind of have like certain names for certain pairs of types. So for the any demonstrative types, I call them the shrewd or discretionary types. So like the since in their minds they're very cognizant of many different options at once, so they're very like mentally nimble in that sense. So
Yes.
like with the NI creative as opposed to like the NI base, we did a little bit more about like no, we're trying to narrow down just to a singular path where they're not well have all these other options. We could try this way, go that way, do this way, but it's all focused on trying to in the service of the NI intentionality, but they just have a broader range of like things that they're considering and factoring in.
And
Yes.
just to contrast with myself, I find myself getting so taken up with a particular perspective, and like this idea is full of the different possibilities, opening to everything else. If I can find actually, I'm not looking at this perspective at that point, so I find I'm actually less fluid in this than an LIE or an EIE would be.
Yeah, they're very like flat-footed. If you think of like from like a Bayesian perspective, it's like almost like all of their priors are set constantly to like the same number. Like almost like they don't go down a path too far so that they can't get back to another option. Yeah, the shrewd aspect is that's a good way to describe them. So like I also think this was the other thing I was going to say and then I forgot, but it ties into this really well. EIEs I think are really good at seeing like loopholes in things. So, like I've spoken about this before, but like when an LSI constructs like a set of rules or whatever, the EIE is the one that says, "Oh, but then this is the scenario that's like not being governed here." Or like if you have these rules, like for example, like a really stupid example would be like return policies to stores, like EIEs will be the ones who figure out how to um like I don't know, like return a TV to Costco that they've had for like 5 years to get like a new TV. Do you know what I mean?
No, I know
Or like
exactly.
My mother has this ability,
yes,
just to just to find the way of getting the people to do what she wants.
yeah, exactly. Or like, if someone is gonna come up with a Ponzi scheme, it's gonna be an EIE. Like they will figure out.
Mm.
Like you see my point though. It's a
Yes.
very like adept use of extroverted intuition.
It's
Um,
that avant-garde creativity. I don't like using creativity and saying it's particular. There's many ways of being creative, but that avant-garde, out of the box creativity,
yeah, out of the box. Yeah.
yes, that is what I think an EIE and it does so well, at least in terms of looks and fashions and feels and vibes and messages. And I think LIE also has that sort of out of the box way, at least in terms of solutions.
Okay. I think are we done talking about everything? I've reached my limit of social interaction, as you can see.
Kimani reached his limit at the exact same moment that you did that. He literally just
He
dropped
actually
out.
hung up.
He just dropped out. He just did an extroverted ethics vulnerable dropout. So there we go. He did message
I've
me on
like,
the way out though.
oh, okay. I've like gradually morphed to like a napping position.
Right. I
Yeah,
think
I mean,
we have talked for a
yeah,
good amount of time. 3 hours is good.
yeah, and it's quite late now, of course, for Jack as well. But I mean, but Jack is more used to staying up at night.
Yep. It's genetic. All right. Well, thank you, all of you. Thank you also to Kimani and in absentia. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rita. Yeah. I look forward to seeing what people think of this video.
Okay.
It was fun. I like this is my favorite function to discuss, as I've said. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks,
Which one should we
everyone.
do next?
Have we done mobilizing?
We haven't. No, we did suggestive. Like, let's do mobilizing. Good idea.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Okay.
Great.
Bye.